Hey guys, thanks so much for coming back to Martin's Daughter. Today I have just a phenomenal conversation with Adam Coleman, who wrote Black Victim to Black Victor. The points that he has to make about rising and achieving, regardless of whether or not you are a Black man or anyone, I think it's just really worth listening to. So let's get started. I saw you on Gothics. I believe
Okay.
you did her interview, and that
Yeah.
was the first time I saw you. And I just thought, when you said that Black people are the only people who've never learned to lead themselves, so I want to go there. That's really what I'm like. I'm just gonna jump right in, but that's where I want to go, because I think that in order to win what's going on, the complete insanity of what's going on, the complete utter racism of what's going on, we have to have better solutions.
Yes. And much of my solutions to what I try to talk about is coming from a place of self-governance. Obviously, I'm not an anarchist. I'm not advocating that there's no need to have government, but they're supposed to contribute, not lead. They're supposed to help support the American public, help support, on a local community basis. The local government, they're supposed to be there to help support, not to set the standard, not to set the agenda. And oftentimes what I find, I don't want to say like Black Americans since the beginning of American history, but more specifically since the Civil Rights era, that's probably the most pivotal point to kind of start with. We've always had some sort of leadership. We've always had some sort of race leadership, whether it be Dr. King, Jesse Jackson, you name it. Although I would argue it's become more nefarious since Dr. King. But there's always been some sort of leadership and this expectation for Black Americans to have leadership and to always be on the edge of activism. And that's something that's kind of troubling, because it always means that we're always in some sort of battle against some sort of nefarious being that we always need to be up in arms about. And sometimes I wonder if we're like the soldier who's been out of war but still thinks that he's in war.
Yeah, like post-traumatic. I'm sure you've heard of the idea of post-traumatic slave syndrome, right?
Yeah.
Just this idea that we can't achieve because of what has happened in the past. So when you said nefarious since Dr. King, you're not saying that Dr. King was nefarious. You're saying that those who followed after him.
Yes.
I know that a lot of activists say that Dr. King would have been a socialist, or that he was a socialist, or he was heading to that. Do you agree with that? Do you so I go by Martin's Daughter. That's what my YouTube channel is, specifically because of the one quote, the famous quote, "One day my little children will be seen for the content of their character, not the color of their skin." That's all I'm interested in. The rest of it, his affairs, whatever else, I'm not so interested in. I'm interested in that one concept, that we should all be unified and be able to, especially 60 years later, you would think that we would go, wow, we've made some progress here. Kids were not afraid to be friends with people who didn't look like them. If they had the same interests, they could be friends with them. But now I feel like we're going backwards. And
I agree.
do you think that's intentional?
In some ways, yes. What we're seeing today is a huge push to go against the parents and what parents want and what parents think. And if the parents push back, then they're the nefarious ones.
Right.
We need to question what are the parents trying to do with their kids, that they're trying to protect them from anti-racism,
Right.
And they try to disguise it as it's the same thing as what we've always taught, and it's not.
It's not the same, and it's not. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are usually the opposites of those things. There is no diversity of thought in this new movement. There is, the equity is only for those of us in the rung, because if you are certain social justice groups, you are going to live like kings, where the rest, and the rest of us, our equity is equal abysmal outcomes. for our children. I recently stumbled across something where what is the solution for these kids who are going to grow up apathetic with no purpose? And I don't think
Yeah.
any parent wants their kid to grow up with no purpose, but that's the plan. And it seems like we're being used. And that's a hard place to be, because I like to come from a place of joy. And
Mhm.
and this idea that I met a woman a couple of weeks ago, a Black woman, who said she was in favor of segregation. And I realized, you know what? I just came to this realization. Anti-racism is actually tribalism. It's pro-tribalism.
Yeah. I mean, because ultimately, to me, it comes down to, it's just neo-Marxism.
Right.
It's essentially that. It's the same traits, the same motives behind it. It's a scheme for divide and conquer. Instead of using class division, they've expanded it into race, gender, you name it. You can literally expand the same concepts, and you hear the same concepts. For example, if you're gay, you are an oppressed minority. If you're Black, you're an oppressed minority. If you're this, you're an oppressed minority. And it always comes back to it being someone else's fault that you're an oppressed minority. And a lot of times it comes back to whether it be white people. If you're gay, it's the opposing end as far as straight. It's this constant division. And it's unfortunate that this ideology has seeped into the mainstream. But one thing, I recently wrote an article, I believe it was for the New York Post, this one, but I basically called it what it is. Anti-racism is a boutique, progressive type of ideology. It's trendy, it's cool sounding. Anti-racism, I want to be on the leading edge of anti-racism, right? And I would imagine in the early 1900s or in the 20s, when, we're for, was it Margaret Sanger and all those people, the
Right.
Genesis,
Right.
eugenics.
Genesis, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. It's the same kind of thing. They wanted to be on the leading edge of progressiveness. And
But it
that's
is the same thing. They still want this. They still they want our children to be part of a useless class. When you are useless, you might think, oh, that's fine, I just won't work. But what happens when the people truly believe that you're useless? When they've dehumanized so many people over the last 2 years. So
and those people allowed themselves to become dehumanized.
Yes.
And this is actually one of those things that I find really unfortunate for a lot of Black Americans, is that they confuse being spoken to as being advocated for.
Yes.
In many ways, they're being manipulated.
Yes.
They're being utilized. It's like, oh yes, Black Lives Matter, we're all in support of you. Okay, but what about these things that would actually benefit us? Well, that's not important.
Yeah,
What's important is
yeah, my school is sending me to DC next month to lobby, because they want to take away all federal funding for charter schools. And charter schools are one of the best solutions for minorities, for anybody who's quote unquote marginalized, right? Anybody who's poor, if they go to a good charter school, they have an opportunity to compete with those people going to private schools.
Right.
And it's open, especially since COVID. There's hardly a lottery. So why do they want to they don't even pretend that they don't have an agenda. They flat out say, we don't want private schools and homeschooling because it has too much of a conservative movement. And that's appalling to me. I wanted to ask you, what brought about your awakening?
My political awakening, I guess, so to speak.
Or just like your social, where you started to figure out. I see right here you have Black Victim to Black Victor, which is your book. And
Yes.
like where did that change for you?
So I will say that I've always kind of felt the same way about race. I've moved around a lot. I've lived in mixed neighborhoods, predominantly white neighborhoods. I've lived all over the place. And even with doing that, there were times that we were homeless, we were poor, single mother, 2 kids. But being around other kids, it was just being around other kids. And I quickly realized that people are flawed and people are people. So the race aspect didn't really bother me so much. And sometimes that got me into, to be frank, certain people don't like it when you don't really give two craps about race as far as who you interact with. How come you're friends with these white boys? Well, they're nice to me and they're cool. They're interesting. Why? Why does it matter? Because, and it's funny because today, I interact with all different types of Black people. And like one day I was like, everybody I talked to is Black. I didn't even realize it because it didn't even matter to me. I was just talking to like-minded people who were nice, who were morally good people. And that's what I gravitated towards. So, as far as race goes, I've always felt the same way. The difference has been, and I'm sorry, and one other thing with race, I always questioned it. I always questioned the narrative around race as to why I should believe certain things or why I should see things in a certain way. But when it came to politics was different. It sounds like I'm blaming one particular person, but this is just kind of like how I got started with politics. It was introduced to me by someone who was Black that the Democrats are for Black people and Republicans are racist. And so that was the introduction to politics for me. And as someone who is generally skeptical and questioning things, I didn't question enough when it came to politics. And so, as someone who's very in tune as to what's going on, but I was in tune to the information that was given to me. So I was very in tune to watching the mainstream media, watching all these things, and I'm taking this information and analyzing it and coming to certain conclusions. And I always hold in the back of my head, Republicans are racist or probably racist or whatever. It's interesting because it wasn't until Trump got into office, I started to listen to podcasts more and I started to be more open. And I remember listening to a notable libertarian. He's like a libertarian conservative kind of guy. And he said some stuff one day I had never heard before, explained in that way. And I was like, he makes a really good point. And I just started listening to all these different types of people. One particular story, because it wasn't just like one moment, it was a series of events. But in the book, I detail, I had been traveling throughout Europe and I met a guy at a pub in Madrid. He was an English guy and we kept in contact. And one day he said he was for Brexit. For people listening, that's for the, England to leave the European Union and be their own sovereign nation again. And I thought that was interesting because I thought Brexit was for these racist British people, right? And so I asked him, well, why are you for Brexit? Because I had nothing but good faith in him. He's been nothing but polite to me. So I just asked him, and almost verbatim, he said, the United States would never allow an outside governing body to tell it what to do. And I was like, that makes a whole lot of sense. And then we just started talking, and he was a more conservative minded person. He's actually the one who introduced me to Thomas Sowell and other people. And then I started to expand, not even just going towards the right, but actually going to the left, because I was a self-described liberal and I wanted to hear, all right, what do the progressives have to say? So I literally went months listening to progressives, but I wanted to hear them out. So I was listening to progressives on a daily basis. I would listen to progressives. I would listen to notable, except for the Young Turks. I couldn't stand listening to Young Turks then, but I would listen to Jimmy Dore. I would listen to Kyle Kalinske. I would listen to sometimes David Pakman. I would listen to these progressive voices and hear their perspective. And then I got to a point where I was like, let me listen to the conservatives. And I would listen to the conservatives and hear what they had to say. Listen to the Ben Shapiro's, Stephen Crowder's, the list goes on. Let's start listening to them all. And for me, it felt like the conservative perspective made more sense. And I started taking all this information I had as far as just being a middle of the road liberal, listening to progressives, listening to conservatives, and started realizing that the progressives have this pie in the sky, just give everybody everything and everything will work. I would hear like the progressives say, all we need is X amount of dollars and we can end homelessness. And I'm just like, life doesn't work that way. Yeah. Like, it doesn't work. Now, don't get me wrong. Conservatives, there are things to pick apart. There are things where they might be wrong. They're not looking at the full picture. But as far as how they see a particular problem and how they attack it is a completely different thing.
It's more
But
like
it
boots
also,
to the ground, right? I mean,
it's more like, right, it's more like boots to the ground, more belief in the individual,
right.
less in the government. And the one thing that was the key thing was I got rid of this whole Republicans are the racists. I got rid of all that. And I just started looking for who are the morally good people. And
Right.
to me, morality isn't necessarily a political spectrum.
Right.
It is the attitude. It's how you carry yourself. I talk a lot about elitists, but you don't have to be a millionaire to be an elitist.
No.
There are a lot of,
Be on a school board.
yeah. I cannot stand, those are probably like my number one enemy. But one of the things I started realizing is that progressives have taken that mantle as being the elitists in our society, where they felt like they need to be the saviors of our society.
Well, and that's an interesting thing is that I feel like the parties have switched. So Democrat, Republican almost mean nothing anymore. It's more of a populist. Do you care about the individual, or do you want literally something ran completely by the state? And I think the difference between why people would still call themselves conservatives, because I live in Utah, where it's a massive amount of two very different kinds of conservatives. There are those, hardworking individuals who are just like, don't tread on me. And then there are those people who the only reason they're conservative is that they want to keep as much money as possible. And they're not necessarily the same.
Right.
Whereas the other side of that is I just think a big warning. And I don't know who's a government that is large enough to give you everything you want is strong enough to take away everything you have. And I've been watching as they're saying, we're coming after charter schools. Oh, and by the way, we're also coming after homeschools. So it's not a matter of, okay, you take the public school and do whatever the heck craziness you want to do with it. We're just going to step away and do our own thing. They're not even allowing us to do our own thing. And my own thing, it's more that I want my kid to have an education that has nothing to do with the anti-racist movement. I don't want him to be tribalistic and to be afraid of complimenting another human being because it might be a microaggression.
Yeah. It's one thing that's interesting. I feel like for the people who have been paying attention, they're watching as the cultural influence is shifting so far to the left that anybody to the right of them is now labeled as a conservative. And maybe there is one particular way that these people, let's say if they're moderately left-leaning people who are now being labeled as conservative, that they might be conservative is because they're trying to conserve the status quo that used to be. How about we just go to school?
Right. Yes. Well, and that's the thing is what they're trying to do now is othering. People will say, oh, you don't accept this group or you don't accept this group. No, they're trying to other everything that we have. They want to take away our religion. They want to take away our institutions. They want to take away our education system and completely turn it into something that is unrecognizable. And everything that we hold morally, children under a certain age that are not even an age of consent should not be taught about sexual actions. Sex ed got into our schools because it was about keeping our children safe. It wasn't about pleasure, because small children don't even know what that means. They have no concept of what that even means. And to say, oh, well, we need to do that to be inclusive. No, I used to be a foster parent. That would be considered grooming. And anybody who did that would not have gotten their license 2 years ago. So these are not solutions for the African-American community. What are the solutions? And I hate to say the African-American community because I'm about as anti-tribal as you can get. I don't believe in these. And that's the way that I grew up. I grew up in 18 foster homes in 9 years. So all sorts of different people, the good, the bad, and the horrible. And the matter of not taking an individual, not taking an experience for what that experience is just crazy to me. It's crazy to not look at a person and take them for who they are instead of what they are.
So there's a lot to unpack. And so that's why, to me, like the race aspect has become more and more minimal as far as what I talk about. If people want to identify as being whatever, as long as I'm not hurting anybody, I really don't care. I might find things a little bit weird, but I really don't care. As long as you're not hurting anybody or forcing people to do whatever you want to do. The part to me is that I know I fit into a certain classification. I know I will be considered as a Black American. That's fine by me. If someone asks me, what's your race? I'm a Black American. But what I take issue is because I know what my classification is, and I see that there are people using my classification to profit, to be manipulative, to, shift the narrative and introduce things on behalf of helping someone like myself, right? We're not doing it for us. It's for the Black people.
Right.
And so
we need porn in we need porn in our schools so that the Black people have a culturally responsive. I'm like, do you know how many Black moms are going to be like, oh, hell no?
Yeah.
Probably some of the most that are like ready to slap you, like get it out.
So that's actually, and this is being perpetrated by progressive elitists. And most of the articles that I've written for Newsweek, New York Post, I go after progressives because I think they're the most detrimental aspect of our society. They're not the majority, they're actually the minority, but they're in very influential positions. So the reason we're talking about schooling is teachers have to go to college, right? And college has turned into an elite institution. They have to come out, they're going into college, they're learning anti-racism, they're learning neo-Marxism, they're becoming believers of it. If not believers of it, they passively think it's good. Then they come out into the real world, and now they're slowly trying to introduce it. George Floyd dies, and that became the marker where we have to do it, right? Corporations took DEI and ran with it. DEI existed before the death of George Floyd. I'm actually working on something for my next book, but after doing research, I think it was maybe like in a 2 to 3 month span, the DEI industry grew 123% after George Floyd.
Yeah.
That is how much money that is in there now. That is how much corporations have bought into it. That is why we are seeing it everywhere. And there's reasons behind it. It's not just corporations just want to be good people. No, it's liability. It's public relations.
Right.
It's all different types of reasons, but ultimately,
it's still a lie.
It's still a lie.
Thing. It's still a lie. It's still extremely racist. I don't know that there's ever been a more racist time in our lives, in my lifetime, than what we're experiencing under the name of trying to help us. There are ways to truly help, and this is not them.
Yeah, but ultimately, you look at college as an institution. It's turning more and more into an elite institution, which preaches saviorism. They're now entering very pivotal aspects of our society. They're entering media as journalists, which is why it sounds like they talk down to us instead of informing us, because they are talking down to us. Unless we, go along with what they're saying. Other than that, you're just too stupid to understand. They're going into education. Why? Because every teacher needs to go into have a degree. So they're bumping elbows with neo-Marxism, and they're bringing that into schools. Administration, the same thing within schools. So you're looking at all these culturally important areas, and then it makes it worse that DEI is now within corporations. So the people who couldn't get jobs before getting these useless degrees now can go into DEI and make a buttload of money within the corporations that we have to work in, implementing pronouns in our emails and all this other nonsense that no one asked for except for them.
They're just the loudest.
Right.
They're the loudest. And I know that here there are diversity, equity, and inclusion specialists in our schools making $8,000 a month to find race schools. Do you really think they're ever not going to find it? When that check is on the line, they're going to find it everywhere. They as Ibram X. Kendi said, it's not a question of if it exists, it's where it exists. Where? And that is their whole job. And they're miserable people. I have met several of them, and I'm just like, these people have no joy. They're always looking, somebody walks into them and they did that on purpose. And you're just like, maybe, maybe you're standing in the middle of a hallway and they're just trying to get by. There's never any grace. There's never any giving people the benefit of the doubt. That's so concerning to me because our kids could be better than that. So
Yeah.
so when I think about the solutions for our children, I think, how much money did BLM make last in the last 2 years? A ridiculous amount of money.
Yeah.
Where's our charter school? Where's our tech schools in Black communities? Where's that ability? Instead, African Americans are still being taught that to be educated is to be quote unquote white, unless you go to school for a useless degree, a social justice degree. Other than that, any achieving is being a traitor to your race.
But the crazy part is that they say that as they've achieved.
Yes. Yes.
It's the most mind-blowing thing ever.
Oh my gosh, when I think of the Obamas, when I think of Meghan Markle and these people sitting there and saying that we can't possibly achieve because we're so oppressed, or like Michelle specifically sitting there in $3,000 boots saying people don't like me because I'm a Black woman. And I'm like, I don't think anybody was more featured in magazine spreads. Now, were there people who did not like her? Yes, I may have been one
Yeah.
of them, but that wasn't my thing. Was always, I saw it in the background. We're going to hold on to victimhood, even as we're rising to levels that nobody else is ever going to touch. We're going to
Yeah.
hold on to victimhood. And when you come, like you came from poverty, I came from the foster system and extreme poverty.
Mhm.
And when you achieve, I don't know about you, but I got a lot of shame along the way. Oh, you think you're better than everybody else, and even the colorism thing came in. Oh,
Mhm.
you're just light, you just think you're white. I don't think I'm white, and nobody around me thinks I'm white,
Yeah.
but to constantly bring that in, it seems to me like that keeps a person as a victim. It seems to me
Yes.
like every program that's coming in, like I have had a really hard time interviewing former fosters since George Floyd, because they've been taught and they've bought it. Many, not all, of course, but many have bought into the narrative that my victimhood makes me virtuous, and they don't understand that that cripples them, that they can achieve so much more if they tried, but they're told not to try. To try is whiteness. So racist.
It really is. I mean, there's so many different areas I could go, but like you mentioned the Obamas, I have a chapter within the book called The Ivory Tower Black Elites. And I'm highlighting how the most economically prosperous people, and they happen to be Black, are telling other Black people that they can't achieve what they achieve. To me, that is one of the most insulting things that anybody can do, right? Erase race. If some rich guy stood up and said, oh, you guys can't become rich like me. I mean, listen, you have all these things is hurdles, you just can't do it. People would be genuinely insulted. But when it's a Black person saying that to other Black people, or even more so, when you're saying it to a camera to spread a mainstream narrative in hopes that Black people believe it, then it's perfectly fine, right? So you can be someone like Ibram X. Kendi, who charges tens of thousands of dollars to speak for an hour, and still believe that this society that is set up to make us all fail has paid you handsomely. Like,
I know.
how is this all?
I mean, there's a point where like you can look at everything and go, oh my gosh, we're screwed. Or you can look at it and just laugh, because you're like, this is insane. This is literal insanity that people are believing this. And I don't believe most people do. I think
No,
most
I
people
don't.
are afraid. I find it interesting that especially the left is always, those white supremacists, neo-Nazi, whatever terms. But I'm like, if you really look at how the Nazis came about, I don't believe that they just one day woke up and were like, I hate my neighbor. Somebody told them, fear them. They're causing you harm. You can't do because they're in your way.
Yeah.
Someone told them all of those things to make them fortified with hatred, or even not even hatred, maybe just like an ability to turn your head as your neighbors are dragged off, right? COVID
Yeah.
did an ability to call and report to the police and have the police office go, what the heck is this? We're reporting on our neighbors.
Mhm.
I mean, it really, really played a number on so many people. And these people that I was watching rise up, I would talk to them. I would have the same kind of conversation as this. I'd have a conversation with them for an hour, and some of them would still like want to text me back, or like keep a relationship going. And then all of the sudden I'm a victim and the world is horrible and I should have free rent for the rest of my life because I grew up in foster care. I don't agree with that. I think the solution is you should have the things that you should be in a program, you should get the things that you need, and there should be a way to wean you off of it.
Yeah.
So I would love to talk about solutions and how you got from extreme poverty to now you're an author, now you're being published in different news media. So what was your story?
Yeah. So, well, in regards to the book,
Yes.
one of the things was I was that, I don't want to say scared, but I was one of those hesitant people to say anything, right? I had been watching the culture wars happen for at least 2 years prior to George Floyd. And over that time is when I was slowly leaving my concepts, thinking about stuff, changing how I saw things. But at least even at the very beginning, when I was just a moderate liberal, I would think we used to actually openly make fun of the woke. Like, I remember that was a thing. It's like, look at those woke people. Right. I remember talking to other liberal people, and one in particular, I remember we would just make fun of them because they were ridiculous, right? They were ridiculous people who just said stuff and we just rolled our eyes, and that's what everybody did. But when it hit mainstream, I watched the same person, someone I was actually pretty close to, all of a sudden sound just like them. And I'm like, it's like a mind virus. Yeah. And so they're looking at me and saying, something's wrong with you. You sound like blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I'm the same person. So it's interesting because there isn't too many things that I've changed politically about myself. I was always for freedom of speech. I've always been anti-war. When it came to the Second Amendment, I wasn't gun-ho about guns. Maybe I'm a little bit more like, yeah, maybe we do need guns. Maybe we do need to protect ourselves. And I see it a little bit different. The one area where I've become definitely more of an absolutist, that I am definitely pro-life, all situations. That I used to be pro-choice. So that is the one area I could definitely say I've switched completely. For the most part, I've always been for the nuclear family. I didn't even think that was like a position, but now it is. Now the nuclear family is a position. Now parental rights is an argument. Just like much of the country, there was debate around same-sex marriage. We kind of all came to a point, it's like, whatever, if you want to get married, get married. We don't even care anymore. That's not even a topic.
Right.
Now it's moved into some very strange, toxic kind of arenas. And even more so, like, fine, do your thing as an adult, but now they want to bring our kids into it. And so this is a different area. This is a battle that we didn't fight before. But my political awakening that inspired me to actually write happened more after George Floyd. So it wasn't immediately afterwards, but George Floyd happened, and just like I've seen other police incidents, someone was killed. It's not good, but it's like, sometimes this stuff happens. I never thought it would turn into what it turned into. And I'm watching as it's like growing. It just felt like the tension was rising. I'm on Facebook. Like every other one is about, like, it was just so intense. And then I'm looking and talking to people who live in Europe, and it's happening over there too. Putting up murals in the United Kingdom and in Germany, talking about, I'm just like, what the hell is going on? And it became this racial reckoning that we all of a sudden need to start having. And it just seems so illogical to me. And even worse, it felt like people that I've known and grown up with who are Black were all of a sudden forgetting their entire lives and having these racial panic attacks, online and freaking out.
Do you
It
feel that
was
they used it?
just,
Do you feel that they, because I do, I feel like they manipulated it. They manipulated it and they built on that emotion. And it was like anything you did, you were stunning and brave. And I remember like Buy Nothing on Facebook group was like, we need to make sure that we are prioritizing African Americans. We need to make sure they're getting something first. And like personally for me, people brought me pie and they were like, we just feel so bad for you. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? I'm like, I literally don't know what's going on. And then I get on and I see teachers immediately start telling our kids when they said, don't ask questions. To ask questions is to have white supremacy. And I'm just like you. I want to ask questions. I want to think about things, and I wanted to know all the details. And I'm like,
yeah,
there's all these cameras, but we don't have a full view of everything that happened. It didn't come out until right before the
months later.
trial, what actually the full of everything that happened.
And it
And
was actually leaked.
yeah, and I feel like had that been shown at the very beginning, the full thing, whatever people's conclusions they would have come to, they would have at least had the whole truth.
Yeah. But you know what? Let's say Derek Chauvin was this racist white guy. He just
Yes.
wanted to do that. Like, let's say that if that narrative was true, to me, it still didn't warrant the reaction. And that was George Floyd started this potential conversation with myself to say, like, am I going crazy? Am I the only one who's thinking like this is overblown? And that's when I started seeking out other people and just kind of talking to people, going into like free speech arenas. And I'm like, no, you're not crazy, bro. Like, we're not saying it on Facebook because we'll get censored and people will yell.
Right.
Well, over here, you're not crazy. Like, yeah, you're right. I'm like, this is
And these people
ridiculous.
were African Americans themselves too. They were Black
Some of
people.
them were, some of them weren't. I'm just like, am I losing my mind about this? Because this doesn't make sense. So that's when I started writing. And it's one particular website that I was on. And I remember some people were like, you should write more. And I was like, okay, it actually encouraging me to write. And so that's when I was like, I finally have my book idea, because I had wanted to write a book a couple of years prior, but I didn't have the topic. So I was like, this is it. I'm going to start writing. And basically, it was maybe like 2-3 months after George Floyd, is when I started writing. It took me about 9 months,
That's amazing.
from start to
That's
finish.
amazing. So it was kind of therapy. It was kind of your way of, I mean, really your way of getting through, because I don't even know how to explain what I feel still to this day, because my bridesmaids, well, I don't talk to them anymore because they
Mm,
suddenly, knowing me since I was a teenager, aging out of foster care and being my friends for 20 years, and all of the sudden they're like, we just don't think you understand how oppressed you are. And these are white women who I've known my entire I'm like, I have starved before and been like, hey, can I crash on your couch basically so I can eat some top ramen?
mm,
So I'm not in denial of levels of oppression. I'm not in denial of whether or not racism exists. But it has been crazy making, and it's been
yeah,
crazy making to have to stand up and fight for something that people already fought for 60 years ago. They already fought, and it just feels like the people who didn't want them to win in the first place realized, ooh, they don't like our vile rhetoric. So instead, we need to sound like we're the people of compassion.
mhm,
And really what they did was kind of infantilized people. And that's my problem, is it's like, I truly do believe in systemic racism. I just think that our systemic racism, I think that the very systemic racism that we have is being perpetuated by the people who say they're going to fix it. They are the
yes,
worst of the whole bunch. And they're like, now we want to bring our ideas out in the open.
yeah,
Now we want to do what we did to Black people by teaching them that they're victims, by teaching them that they can't possibly achieve, by teaching them, to me, critical race theory says exactly what it is. It teaches you to be critical, not to think critically, but to be critical all the time. That right there gives you a
exactly.
mental disorder, right?
Yeah,
So we want to take what was done to African Americans, and you want to take that and put it on all of our kids through this social emotional learning. And that's the social emotional learning is teaching them nothing matters more than how you feel. And then you get people that you meet that are 60 years old who tell you, well, I agree with segregation because we're the only people who can protect ourselves.
Yeah.
Because they've taught them to be victims for forever. So there has to be a point. Like, did you ever buy into the victim narrative for yourself?
Yes, at different points in my life, but not necessarily surrounding race per se. There was one short period of time where, because I'm always open to certain things, but there was one small period of time where I actually got into like a little bit of the pro-black stuff, listening like to Rick Nasheed and yeah, I went down that rabbit hole a little bit, for a short period of time, believing the racism is prejudice plus power, just like keeping that in the back of my mind. But it didn't hold long because I lived my entire life in a completely different way. My son is mixed. How, like, this way of thinking doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So it was a very short period of time, but that didn't really affect me as much because I kind of just like threw that to the side. But it was more of, in the book, I'm not necessarily just talking about being the victim as far as like being the victim racially, but just feeling like you're incapable. Sometimes when you struggle in life, you think that taking on this victim mentality is somehow going to help you, or even just like you're not even thinking that, but your failures kind of build up to making you feel like you're a victim rather than it just being a test. That's what I started realizing over a period of time, that I had gone through a bunch of experiences in my childhood, in my adulthood. I was homeless for a short period of time as an adult as well, being broke, having a car repossessed, having to move back home, rebuild myself, have to go through all these different things to come out on the other side. And I started realizing that that is something to be extremely proud of, right? That I was able to do those things. And you know what? Most of those things that happened to me were my fault.
Wow,
And,
that's
and I'm trying to use the book. That's what I'm saying. Like, this book is not just, the Black victim,
right.
the Black victor. I'm actually kind of talking about myself. There's a lot of stories about my life and how I felt and what I went through, mixed in with giving social commentary, because I wanted to show people that if I was able to overcome these things, I'm just a guy, right? There's nothing special about me. If I'm able to overcome these things, then why can't you? Why can't
Absolutely.
other people? Why can't we move forward past these things? And if you want to bring race into it, why do we need to still remain victims? So if we were to use the race context, slavery, Jim Crow, and here we are today, that should be something extremely, prideful of, that a group of people, I remember Thomas Sowell talking about how we had the fastest literacy rate increase
Yeah.
post-slavery.
Yep.
And, that is damn impressive for, for a large group of people who were incapable of learning because of slavery. And yet here we are today with more opportunities and more economic growth.
I
We
would
have
say
more
every
millionaires.
opportunity, I mean,
Yeah.
like there's all of these, well, it's school isn't equitable. I'm like, do you know how many scholarships for colleges and also private schools go unused every
Mhm.
year? These options have been out there and they've been out there for a long time. I've met many people who went through college because they played the race card. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, it was a resource available to them and they used it versus saying, we never have a chance. There's a huge difference between going, these are available, I'm going to use them. And I'm not against them being available. I just think that it should be based on need for every single person.
Yeah.
So I don't think that an African American and I know somebody who is a head psychiatrist in Utah. Okay. And, I don't think that their children should get the same thing as my friend in Tennessee who has to turn off the stove to turn on the computer. You know, so, and she's white. And
Mhm.
this idea that we have to play these games to make up for the sins of our fathers and the sins of the past, especially when the people who are constantly saying we need to make up for these live like kings. They are the
Yes.
elitists. They have $800,000 homes or more. And they're like, oh, well, we all need to be equitable. You like, you
Yeah.
know, you want our children to be stupid so that they can't come and be smarter than you and have better ideas and take from your kid. That's how I see it. I see it as they want to make sure that we never achieve.
You know what? And I'm glad you actually framed it that way, because to go back a little bit, this is why I don't talk about race as much as I used to. One, I think race is sometimes it's kind of a boring topic, because it's, it's
So played out.
it's played out. Because the real story is class. It is a class division. Now, it's a class division that has an ideological framework
Right.
to it. And that's where progressivism comes in for me. It's not that every rich person is a progressive, but it feels like every prominent progressive is a rich person, and they believe in certain things and their mindset is a particular way. And so for me, I'm like, I don't care if this person is Black. I don't care if this person is white, Hispanic. They're saying the same thing, and it's just as impactful in our society or culture.
But they also have
So
their useful idiots too, right? I mean,
yeah,
there are definitely poor progressives who are just like, I want welfare. I want to be taken care of by the state. I don't care about freedom of speech as long as I get to play video games all day.
yeah, there's definitely that aspect. But to me, it's about class. That seems to be the biggest indicator, and that's why I feel like race is almost a distraction from class, because it's very easy to be like white progressive elites. I'm like, don't forget about the Black ones and Hispanic ones. They all hang out.
Yeah.
They all hang up at the same country club. They believe the same things. They behave in the same manner. I might have an article coming out again in the New York Post talking about how this debt forgiveness that we're talking about now, but what they don't tell you is that the top percentile of income earners, their debt is as much as the bottom three combined.
Right.
They're the debt holders in our country. Yet now we are supposed to take everybody's money and put it so the elite's children can be just wiped clean, and we'll take the responsibility of it and just move on. There's so much of that that's happened. The 2008 crisis, you have these wealthy Wall Street bankers. What do? They screw us over. Not even just us, they screw the world over, right? And Barack Obama gets into office, and what does he do? The status quo, same old thing. No one goes to jail. They give them money and say, don't do it again. And what they don't tell us is that they put mechanisms in that they don't even have to go to Congress to get more money. And so to me, it's like one big club. I think it was George Carlin who said it. It's one big club and you ain't in it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to talk about that more and not fall into their boutique religion of
But how do we not
anti-racism.
fall into the other group either? Because that's what the socialists say, right? And what I find is a lot of the socialists, the ones who are that educated college class, possibly usually working for big tech, who say the exact same things, and they're not billionaires. They're not even millionaires. They're living the life that, their parents couldn't have dreamed of. And they have an elite smugness. And so I think you have to be careful, because that's why people say the only solution is communism. I don't think the solution is communism. I don't think so
either.
Because what happens in communism, it's been painted, this is why we don't know about Mao, because it's been painted as, oh, communism is a big commune where we're all happy and singing Kumbaya. And we're not. People are starving, people are being murdered, and meanwhile, the elites live like kings. I feel like that's always the story. The elites live like kings. The people who want us to live in boxes and own nothing and be happy, they aren't going to own nothing. Yeah.
In every economic system, there's always going to be people at the top.
Yeah.
Communism or not. There's a fine line between calling out elites and, going towards the socialist route of saying that rich people are the problem. I try to do my best to differentiate elites and elitists, depending on what we're talking about. So for the financial crisis, I'm saying the economic elite, right? I'm saying that their access to money and capital is a contributing factor as to why we got screwed over. But it doesn't mean I want to eat the rich. The rich pay the most taxes within this country. And because of them being able to pay the most taxes, they provide the most for our country. So I understand that aspect to it. I think it's a good thing when people become rich, right? As long, assuming that it's in a fair manner, let's just put it that way.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
But I have no problem with people becoming millionaires. That is if this is the track that you're on and you're able to do it, more power to you. No shame. I'm not of the shaming the rich. But what I am of are the rich hindering the progress of everybody else.
Yes, absolutely.
You got your stuff, and then you want to do things and take away from us so we can't get it. So for me, if we're talking about college education and paying off the elite kids' debt, we're paying off everybody's debt, right? We're paying off everybody's debt, including the rich. Okay, but what are you doing afterwards? Because what's going to happen is inflation is going to get worse. The rich are already rich; they'll be fine. They can take an inflation hit. We can't. We're still going to struggle, and we're already struggling with inflation. It's going to keep getting worse. The mechanisms of the college system won't change. Why? Because no one's talking about it. What's the emphasis of putting some caps on tuition, forcing schools to think differently about tuition? Where's the emphasis on that? There isn't. It's all about getting rid of debt. All it's going to do is solidify that these college institutions are for the elite or for the risk takers on the lower class. And so I think it's incredibly important that we look at the class aspect, not to say that one class is good and the other class is bad. It's not that, but it's to talk about some of these people who are in this particular class, who believe this particular way, who act in a particular way, are doing things to screw everybody over, and that's not right.
That's what I believe the whole race war is about, right? It's a distraction. Yeah. It's a distraction because you sit there going, yeah, we're never going to be equitable with you. So what exactly is equitable outcome? And instead, and so every little thing is let's find the problem. Let's find the problem. Let's find the problem. Let's find the problem. Because if we're constantly focusing on finding the problems, we have no time to work on the solutions. How can we help African Americans be victors specifically? And I know, once again, you don't want to go down that route of just African Americans, but how can we help those who believe in the victim narrative become victors?
So at the ending of my book, I have, I believe it's 9 solution chapters. We didn't really actually talk too much about it, but I think the root of all of this starts with family. I think the victim narrative almost coincides with the single parent rate for Black Americans. It is a lot easier to believe that you're a victim when you don't have a strong figure to put you in check and have you see reality. And so, this is not to sound sexist or anything like that, but I think that there are natural strengths that men and women have. Some of them overlap, some of them don't. And that doesn't mean that one is better than the other. That means that they're different. It's a yin and yang in my head. And there's a balance between the two. And when you have the male masculine figure missing, and you're getting just the female aspect to it, and you're not getting that figure that's saying, hey, life ain't fair. Get yourself together, go out there and do better, and work harder. And it sounds different coming from a man. And it's offensive to say that, but it's true. And I started really understanding this, watching how I'm influential for my son by the words that I'm saying, that I'm able to help pick up his self-esteem, that I'm able to help reinforce certain things that maybe his mother can't do. She could say the same words, but the impact is different. It is a balance between the two. It's much like the scenario. The kid falls, bumps his knee. The mother comes and says, oh, you okay? Is everything all right? And the father says, he'll be fine, right? It's the balance between the two, the nurture and the person who brings you right back to reality and puts you back on the horse and keeps you moving. Now, what if you have a majority of a population that's missing that, right? Or that's missing it consistently? My father wasn't in my life, to be frank about it, and I detail it in the book. But let's say, for myself, and I have to be accountable for myself, I have my son on the weekends, right? I'm not there all the time to always reinforce, because I didn't plan for family properly. I can make excuses. I grew up in this way, but that's the reality. And so now I'm left to try to work even harder to reinforce with him the things that I can't do throughout the week, like if I was in a marriage with his mother and raising him. I'm seeing how family and men in particular affect children in a different way. And we're missing that balance. That's why everything to me feels so imbalanced. That's why everything within, we say the Black community, but for a lot of Black Americans, it feels like a matriarchy. It really
Yeah,
does.
it does, but at the same time, there is a glorification of the single mother, and
Yes.
don't you dare say anything against a single mother or whatever, or encouraging people to that aren't in marriages or even in a strong relationship to get pregnant so that their first single child can have a sibling. And I'm wondering how you solve that particular solution when it's so bought into. Are there solutions? I mean, like, I guess I'm idealistic in that I feel like, can't you start a club? Can't you start like the one guy who went to a school and saw that there weren't any fathers, and so he started collecting ties and teaching those boys how to be men and how to, I mean, just to be dignified.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that it worked. It doesn't mean it worked in every situation, but I'm just like, what are the solutions that can be taught? Because we live in a world, like I said before, of othering. And so we magnify all that truly is wrong. I've met so many women who are like, because I was a stay-at-home mom until this year when I chose to work because my son's getting older.
Mhm.
Oh, I've met so many women who've told me, I'm jealous of you. Why can't I be a stay-at-home mom? Why can't I have, this kind of life? And yet we are so minimalized. We're called trad lifestyle, because there's
Mhm.
trans lifestyle and now there's trad lifestyle, which means that we're traditional, and that makes us weird and that makes us odd. But it is true. And it is true that African American families used to be the most intact families.
Mhm.
And somebody came after that and said, hey, if you don't have a father in the house, we'll provide you money. And it really took men's self-worth away. They were
Yeah.
like, I don't have to provide for family. I can go off and do whatever I want to because the state will take care of it.
I mean, that's definitely one contributing aspect to it. Other people I've talked to bring that up, but the big thing for me is feminism.
Absolutely.
I lean on that because one generation goes by, it's still happening. Well, why is it still happening? Even though this is a new generation, they can think differently, they could do differently, it's still happening. Matter of fact, it's getting worse. Why is that the case? And the proliferation of feminism, especially among Black women, to me, was one of the most eye-opening things when I really started to examine it, because those SJWs that were on the college campus, right, the pink and green hair that we make fun of, hold up, they sound just like a lot of the Black women that I've ever met that show up on popular television that say all of these things. And I'm realizing that maybe they don't even realize that they're feminists. That is how entrenched it is within our culture. That's why I say it's a matriarchy.
Yes.
You don't insult the matriarch. You don't talk about anything like that. And even me talking about it publicly can be skewed as
Well, I
being,
do. I do because again, it's the individual. And just
yeah,
because you gave birth doesn't make you a good mother.
yes,
I'm just going to be blunt there. I had a horrible mother, and so just because you gave birth doesn't make you a good mother.
yeah,
It's are you a nurturer? And sometimes it changes because like I'm honestly the person who will tell my son, okay, get up, you're okay. And my husband's the one who's like, oh, let's save all of his baby teeth. So like then I'm just like, this is weird, but okay. So people have their different things, but to say, in my opinion, when you truly love someone, you tell them the truth.
yeah,
And so if a mother is doing a crap job at mothering, or if she's bringing somebody else, another child into the world that she's not really going to take care of, then
mhm,
I'm sorry. Then you need to be told you're doing a crap job. And now it's time to be a victor, right? Now it's
yeah,
time to stop considering yourself, because it's the same thing. It's for men, obviously, but it's also for women. Like,
Mhm.
There's a point where you buck up, buttercup, and you do what you need to do. So,
Absolutely.
one of the things that the social and emotional movement, right? This literally teaching our kids in school to be victims tells them again that they're glorified and that there's nothing that they can do about their problems. That is a lie. It is
Yeah.
always a lie. Every single day, you can get up and do one thing better than you did the day before. One tiny thing. And that becomes a collection of things that can improve your life if you wanted to. But you have a huge uphill battle because there's so many people telling you, "Oh, you don't have to try. You don't have to try."
Yeah.
We can't expect that from our minorities because that's racist. It's racist to expect a high standards from minorities. It's
Yeah.
disgusting. I've had people like flat out attack me for daring to say that we have free will. And is there anything else that you want to say?
You said earlier, there's a lot of people who think like us. They're just quiet about it. They're scared. And I'm trying to tell people, stop being scared. Like the boogeyman ain't that scary. And here I am. I put out my book. It's my name, my full name. I publish articles now. God, thank God have these opportunities. I've published in Newsweek, in the New York Post with my name. And you know what I get? I get people who reach out to me and say, thank you. You're right. Thank you for saying this. A woman, it was a New York City teacher, reached out to me. She's like, yes, I'm seeing it all, these progressives here. I'm a liberal. And but I'm saying the thing out loud. I'm putting my name on it and I'm not being scared about it because you know why? Those moments where I experience turmoil and doubt and homelessness and all these different things had actually made me stronger and unafraid. I'm not worried like other people are. Other people live in comfort. I've had no comfort and I still came out of it. So I'm not worried about that. I'm not, I'm not asking to be canceled or people to come after me, but you know what? I approach it in a way that isn't inflammatory. I'm not very political, like I'm not hyper political or anything like that, but I'm just talking about ideas. I'm talking about rhetoric.
Just being authentic.
I'm just being authentic about it.
One thing that I've realized, every single victor across everything has an outlet, has a
Mhm.
passion. So I really appreciate that you shared getting people to write because writing is cathartic and it's like calming, but it also lets you get out everything that you think. Even if you never share it with a single person, you're getting it out of what I call that gerbil in your brain that just like never stops, especially the last 2 years. What
Yeah.
what society has done to us as free thinking African Americans is flat out brutal. It has been brutal. And so I think that um I just really appreciate knowing that there are other people who've gone down that road because like my husband, he's white. He really doesn't understand it to the same depths that I like to go, wait a second, I've been completely reduced to nothing but the color of my skin.
Yeah.
How exactly do I proceed with this? And he's just like, you never stop, you never stop. And I'm like, this is the civil rights movement of our day. you
Yeah.
know this is really, and it's not just for African Americans, it's for every single person, everybody who believes in liberty, everybody who believes in free speech, everyone who just wants to be able to be who they are. This is their moment, and it's getting ripped away because we are afraid to speak, we are
Yeah.
afraid to write, put the pen to the paper and share it.
One last thing I'll say, I want to leave
Mhm.
the people who are watching and listening. I'll say the same thing I said to a crowd of people in Wisconsin, a bunch of parents who decided to get up and stop complaining about the school board and actually start running for school board. So I was actually at an event where there was maybe 10 or 12 people who were running for school board in that particular area. And one of the things I said was, stop being afraid of what they call you. Let them call you white supremacists. Let them call you racist. You know you're not. It doesn't matter. I really don't care if someone calls me the black face of white supremacy. I don't care if they call me a coon. I laugh at it. Why? Because it's not going to stop me. And I know that more people agree with me than disagree with me. But ultimately, it's about myself. I care about expressing myself. If you don't like what I have to say, that's your problem, not my problem. And no one is owed for me to care about their emotional status. That's you. That's your issue, right? I know who I am. I'm not a mean person. I'm not a vindictive person. I'm here to express myself. If you don't like it, that's fine. But we're letting people stop us because they're slandering us. Like, who cares? Because what's happening is more and more people are realizing this, and those words are becoming hollow.
Yes, if everything is something, then nothing is. And that's the thing, is that the real things are going to lose all meaning. When something really atrocious happens, people are going to go, oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's the unfortunate side effect. But I think what's happening is, because the way our society is structured, we do have the freedom of speech, right? We do have the allowance to push back and to question things. And we have separation of state and the federal government, right? We don't have one unilateral government. Relatively speaking, I see what you're saying, but we have mechanisms in place where we can push back behind it, right? If our school board is doing stuff, guess what? We have a way of running against them and getting these people out. But I think, just as much as I said, wokeism is boutique, it's a trend. At some point, the trend is going to end. And so we'll be left behind saying we won the culture war.
Oh, thank you. Seriously, Adam, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and for just putting yourself out there and achieving. Where can we get your book?
So people can buy the book from Amazon. You can also buy it from Wrongspeak.net. Selling signed copies as well on there. They can find me on Twitter a lot these days, so at wrong_speak. Same thing with Facebook. You can look up facebook.com/wrongspeakadam for my page.
Literally was like, well, he's on my dream list of somebody I'll talk to one day when I finally start doing something. Just because I want real, authentic conversations. I think we achieved that.